70 million people died. Thousands of films were made, but only a handful actually captured what it felt like to be there. Here's the part nobody tells you. Some of the greatest war films ever committed to celluloid are sitting on YouTube right now, completely free, waiting for you. No subscription, no paywall, just cinema that will wreck you in the best possible way. Number 12. The Story of G.I. Joe, 1945. Before Steven Spielberg was born, a director named William Wellman made the film that Eisenhower himself called the greatest war picture I've ever seen. That's not a marketing quote. That's the Supreme Allied Commander of World War II talking. And yet most people under 40 have never heard of the Story of G.I. Joe, which is a genuine crime against cinema history. This film is based on the wartime dispatches of journalist Ernie Pyle, a man who embedded himself with ordinary infantrymen in the mud of Italy and wrote about them with the kind of raw, unglamorous honesty that most war coverage completely avoids. Wellman took that honesty and put it on screen at a time when Hollywood was still pumping out flag-waving propaganda pieces. This was something entirely different. It was tired. It was dirty. It was human. Burgess Meredith plays Pyle with a quiet authority that feels more like a documentary subject than an actor. Robert Mitchum, in one of his earliest major roles, delivers a performance so grounded and so achingly real that the film essentially launched his entire career. There is a scene near the end involving soldiers carrying their fallen commanding officer on a mule that was reportedly so emotionally devastating that combat veterans who attended early screenings broke down completely in the theater. The film was nominated for 4 Academy Awards and was one of the first Hollywood productions to portray American soldiers not as heroes carved from marble, but as exhausted, frightened, homesick young men who just wanted to survive. Critics at the time called it the least glamorous war film Hollywood has ever made, and they meant it as the highest possible praise. Stream it free on YouTube and understand why Mitchum's career exploded immediately after. Number 11. Attack. Dombey, 1956. Robert Aldrich made a film so scathing about military cowardice and the criminal negligence of officers that the U.S. Army refused to cooperate with its production, pulled all equipment and support, and essentially tried to pretend it didn't exist. That's how you know Attack is something special. Set during the Battle of the Bulge, this film does something almost no American war movie of its era dared to do. It makes the villain not a Nazi, not the enemy across the wire, but an American captain who sends his own men to die to protect his political career. Jack Palance plays Lieutenant Costa, a man watching his soldiers get slaughtered because his commanding officer is a drunk, spineless coward with the right political connections. The rage Palance brings to this role is barely contained, like watching a man try to hold a grenade together with his bare hands. Eddie Albert plays the cowardly Captain Cooney, and his performance is almost unwatchable in the best possible way. He makes you genuinely despise a fictional character with the kind of intensity usually reserved for real people. Director Aldrich was openly furious at what he saw as the military's culture of protecting incompetent officers. And every frame of this film breathes that fury. The Army's refusal to help actually became a selling point. Critics praised it as the rare war film with the courage to look inward. Variety called it a tense, brutally honest drama that pulls no punches. For a film made in 1956, during the height of Cold War patriotism and military reverence, this was practically revolutionary filmmaking. Find it free on YouTube and watch Hollywood say something genuinely dangerous. Number 10. The Victors, 1963. Carl Foreman spent years on the Hollywood blacklist for refusing to name names during the McCarthy era. When he finally got the chance to make his definitive statement about war, he made a film so uncompromising that Columbia Pictures reportedly had no idea how to market it and essentially released it into the void. The Victors disappeared, and it absolutely should not have. Shot in stark black and white across real European locations, this film follows a squad of American soldiers from North Africa all the way through to Germany, and it refuses to give them a triumphant arc. There is no rousing finale. There is no clean moral lesson. There is only the grinding, dehumanizing accumulation of things war does to people over time. Borman structured it almost like a documentary collage, cutting between combat sequences, occupation scenes, black market deals, and moments of unexpected tenderness. The cast reads like a who's who of early 60s talent. George Hamilton, George Peppard, Eli Wallach, Albert Finney, Jane Moreau, and Romy Schneider. But the single most devastating sequence in the film involves the military execution of an American deserter in the snow, accompanied not by a somber orchestral score, but by Frank Sinatra singing "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas." It is one of the most genuinely disturbing juxtapositions in the history of war cinema, and it lands like a punch to the stomach even today. Foreman called the film his indictment of war itself. Critics were split. Some found its bleakness exhilarating, others found it punishing. Either way, nobody forgot it. Stream it free on YouTube and experience one of cinema's most unjustly buried masterpieces. Number 9. Hell in the Pacific, 1968. Two men, one tiny island, no dialogue they can understand. And somehow director John Boorman turned that premise into one of the most psychologically intense films of the entire Vietnam-era war cycle, despite being set in the Pacific theater of World War II. Hell in the Pacific is lean, brutal, and absolutely riveting from start to finish. Lee Marvin plays an American pilot stranded on a remote Pacific island. Toshiro Mifune plays a Japanese naval officer in the same situation. Neither speaks the other's language. They are enemies. They are also the only two people in the world right now, which creates a tension that slowly, agonizingly, transforms into something more complicated. Boorman strips away everything that war movies usually rely on: ideology, unit camaraderie, tactical action, and leaves you with just two human beings whose survival depends entirely on whether they can overcome everything their respective civilizations have trained them to feel about each other. Marvin and Mifune, two of the most commanding screen presences in the world at that time, filmed this largely on the island of Palau, without a completed script. Much of what you see is genuine improvisation between two actors who were genuinely unsure what the other was saying in real time. That uncertainty is visible on screen, and it is electric. The studio famously demanded a different ending than the one Boorman shot, and the theatrical version reflects that interference in a jarring final moment. The director's preferred ending is darker and, frankly, more honest. Critics noted the film's unusual formal daring. Pauline Kael called it a stunt that almost becomes art. Stream it free on YouTube and decide which ending is right. Number 8. Five Graves to Cairo, 1943. Billy Wilder directed this film during the war itself, when the outcome was still genuinely uncertain, and he made something that feels less like wartime propaganda and more like an elegant, ice-cold spy thriller with one of cinema's all-time great villain performances buried inside it. Most people talk about Wilder's comedies or Sunset Boulevard or Double Indemnity. Far fewer talk about Five Graves to Cairo, which is a serious oversight. Erich von Stroheim plays Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the actual historical figure, the Desert Fox himself. And he does something extraordinary with the role. He makes Rommel brilliant, charming, witty, and completely terrifying. At a time when Hollywood was almost universally portraying German officers as screaming cartoon monsters, Wilder and von Stroheim had the audacity to portray the enemy's most celebrated commander as someone genuinely worthy of respect, even as you understood exactly what he represented. It was controversial. It was also far more unsettling than any amount of scenery-chewing villainy. The plot involves a British soldier who stumbles into a hotel being used as Rommel's headquarters and must maintain a fake identity while gathering intelligence. Franchot Tone plays the soldier with exactly the right mixture of desperation and improvised cool. The script crackles with the kind of sharp, sophisticated dialogue that Wilder was already making his signature. Made for Paramount on a relatively modest budget, the film was a commercial and critical success, and Wilder himself cited it as a pivotal early work in understanding how to blend genre entertainment with moral complexity. It is available free on YouTube right now, and the von Stroheim performance alone is worth every second. Number 7. The Train, 1964. John Frankenheimer replaced Arthur Penn as director 4 days into filming because the star, Burt Lancaster demanded it. The production nearly collapsed. Lancaster and Frankenheimer fought constantly, and the result was one of the most purely thrilling action films of the decade, one that also happens to be a genuine philosophical meditation on whether art is worth dying for. The train operates on two levels simultaneously and succeeds brilliantly on both. The premise is almost absurdly high concept. A fanatical German colonel, played with magnificent obsession by Paul Scofield, is determined to transport a trainload of priceless French Impressionist paintings, Picasso's, Matisse, Renoir, back to Germany in the final days of the occupation. A French railway inspector, played by Lancaster, is pressured by the resistance to stop the train at the cost of real human lives. The film never lets you forget that equation. Is a Renoir worth a man's life? Is it worth 10 lives? Frankenheimer refuses to answer that question for you. The action sequences are genuinely astonishing, especially considering this was 1964. Frankenheimer used real trains and real explosions, and Lancaster, a former circus acrobat, did much of his own physical work. There is a sequence involving multiple locomotive collisions that looks more expensive than anything Hollywood was doing at twice the budget. Paul Scofield's Colonel von Waldheim is one of war cinema's most fascinating antagonists, not cruel in a conventional sense, but convinced of his own cultural superiority in a way that is perhaps more chilling than outright violence. Stream it free on YouTube and let the final shot sit with you afterward. Number 6. The Purple Heart, 1944. Louis Milestone directed this film as a direct response to an actual event, the capture and trial of American airmen by Japan after the Doolittle raid. And the result is one of the most ferociously angry American films made during the entire war. It is propaganda, absolutely, but it is propaganda with a genuine moral spine and a level of dramatic intensity that still hits hard 80 years later. Dana Andrews leads a cast of 8 American airmen who have been shot down over Tokyo and put on trial by a Japanese military tribunal determined to extract the information about where their planes were launched from. What follows is essentially a courtroom drama under extreme duress, and Milestone stages it with a theatrical intensity that builds and builds until the final moments become almost unbearable. The film is designed to make you furious, and it works. What elevates The Purple Heart above straightforward wartime agitprop is the complexity it allows the American characters. These are not invincible heroes. They are frightened, hurt men who are deciding, collectively, how they want to face what is coming. The quiet conversations between them carry a weight that most action-focused war films never bother to develop. Andrews anchors everything with a stillness that reads as genuine courage rather than performed bravado. The film was a massive commercial success, grossing several times its production cost. Overseas, it was used as a morale tool for Allied forces. It was also reportedly used in post-war war crimes proceedings as a cultural document of the period. Stream it free on YouTube for a masterclass in wartime filmmaking with genuine purpose. Number 5. Went the Day Well? 1942. A British Village. A warm Sunday morning. And then 84 German soldiers disguised as British troops quietly take over the entire community while the locals slowly realize something is deeply, terribly wrong. Went the Day Well? Is perhaps the most unsettling homefront film of World War II, and it was made while the war was still happening, which gives it an urgency that no amount of period reconstruction can replicate. Alberto Cavalcanti directed this Ealing Studios production with a tone that starts almost pastoral, and then curdles into something genuinely dark. The film is based on a Graham Greene story and carries Greene's characteristic refusal to sentimentalize human behavior under pressure. When the villagers finally resist, they do so with a ferocity that shocked contemporary audiences. A vicar's housekeeper kills a German soldier with an axe. An elderly woman throws a grenade. Cavalcanti shoots these moments without triumph or horror, just the flat, matter-of-fact quality of people doing what must be done. What makes the film historically remarkable is its honesty about British complacency and class dynamics. The collaborator who assists the Germans is not some obvious villain. He is a respected local landowner, a pillar of the community, which was a genuinely provocative choice in 1942 and remains so today. The film was not a major commercial hit on release, but its reputation has grown substantially over the decades. Martin Scorsese has cited it as an influence. The British Film Institute considers it one of the most important British films ever made. Stream it free on YouTube and understand why this quiet, devastating film has lasted. Number 4. The Cranes Are Flying, 1957. The Soviet Union won World War II at a cost so staggering it is almost impossible to process. Somewhere between 27 and 30 million dead. For over a decade after the war, Soviet cinema was largely forbidden from portraying that loss with any personal honesty. Then Mikhail Kalatozov made The Cranes Are Flying, and everything changed. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. It was the first Soviet film to screen widely in the West in the post-war era, and it is one of the most visually inventive films ever made. The story is intimate and devastating. A young woman named Veronica watches her beloved Boris leave for the front, endures unimaginable personal tragedy during the occupation of Moscow, and must find a reason to survive and continue. That summary sounds simple. The execution is anything but. Cinematographer Sergei Urusevsky created images that still look avant-garde today. Swooping crane shots, disorienting spiral staircases, filmed from below, handheld sequences that feel more like 1970s American cinema than anything being made in 1957. Tatiana Samoilova's performance as Veronica is one of the great pieces of screen acting from any country in any decade. She won no major award for the role because the system did not permit it, but critics and filmmakers around the world recognized immediately that they were watching something extraordinary. François Truffaut was reportedly overwhelmed by the film at Cannes. The Soviet government initially had reservations about the film's moral complexity. Veronica is not a spotless heroine, but its international success made criticism impossible. Stream it free on YouTube and experience the moment Soviet cinema briefly broke free. Number 3. Rome, Open City, 1945. Roberto Rossellini made this film in the rubble of Rome with scraps of leftover film stock, non-professional actors borrowed from the street, and almost no money at all, and he essentially invented a cinematic movement in the process. Rome, Open City is the founding document of Italian neorealism, film made in direct response to the Nazi occupation of Rome that ended only months before principal photography began. The rawness is not accidental, and it is not aesthetic posturing. It is the direct result of a city that had not yet cleaned up its wounds, making a film about those wounds. Rossellini shot on location in the actual streets, in actual apartments, with the actual light of a city still blinking back into existence. Anna Magnani's most famous scene, running into the street after her arrested partner, screaming his name, was filmed with a real crowd who were not entirely sure what they were watching. The plot follows a communist partisan, a Catholic priest, and a pregnant woman navigating the Nazi-controlled city in the final days of the occupation. Rossellini refuses to separate the political from the human. The priest's faith and the partisan's ideology are not in conflict. They are two expressions of the same resistance against the same evil. The film's most powerful argument is that decency transcends political categories. American audiences initially did not know what to make of the film's rough documentary texture. Critics were transfixed. Time magazine named it one of the greatest films ever made. It changed how cinema thought about realism permanently. Stream it free on YouTube and watch the birth of modern cinema in real time. Number 2. Night and Fog, 1956. 32 minutes. That is all Alain Resnais needed to make what many historians, filmmakers, and critics consider the definitive documentary about the Holocaust. A film so confrontational, so precise, and so morally serious that it has been required viewing in French schools for decades and remains as necessary today as the moment it was made. Night and Fog intercuts archival footage and photographs from the Nazi concentration camp system with newly filmed color sequences of the same locations in 1955. Quiet, grassy, almost peaceful in the afternoon light. The contrast is the argument. Resnais is not simply showing you what happened. He is insisting that you understand how completely the world has moved on, and asking whether that movement. Number 1. Grave of the Fireflies. 1988 Studio Ghibli released 2 films on the same day in April 1988. The first was My Neighbor Totoro. Warm, joyful, one of the most beloved children's films in history. The second was Grave of the Fireflies, and Ghibli intended them to be shown as a double feature. After audience reaction, they were never officially paired again. People walked out of Totoro and directly into a film that reportedly left Japanese cinemas in stunned, tearful silence. Isao Takahata adapted a semi-autobiographical novel by Akiyuki Nosaka, who spent his entire adult life processing the guilt of surviving World War II when his younger sister did not. The film follows 14-year-old Seita and his 4-year-old sister Setsuko in the final months of the war, as American firebombing destroys their home and their mother, and as every social support structure around them collapses through a combination of official indifference and the grinding cruelty of survival instinct in extreme scarcity. Takahata made a deliberate choice to use animation not as a distancing mechanism, but as an amplifier of emotional intimacy. The softness of the drawn image makes Setsuko's deterioration more unbearable, not less. Roger Ebert called it one of the greatest war films ever made and one of the most powerful anti-war statements in any medium. He wrote that it exists outside of the usual categories and should be seen by everyone. The film opens by telling you that Seita dies. You know from the first frame that there is no rescue coming. Takahata does this deliberately. He does not want you to hope. He wants you to watch. He wants you to understand that these 2 children existed, that millions of children like them existed, and that the machinery of war consumed them without noticing. No country's propaganda, no ideological framework, no military strategy accounts for Setsuko. That is the point. Stream it free on YouTube, but do not watch it alone if you can help it. 75 years of cinema and some of its most important work is just sitting on YouTube waiting for you, completely free. Which of these 12 blew your mind, and which one do you think deserves more recognition? Drop your answer in the comments below. And here is the real question worth debating. If Grave of the Fireflies is genuinely one of the greatest anti-war films ever made, why do we still call it an animated film for younger audiences instead of treating it with the same weight we give Schindler's List? Tell me I'm wrong.